Blessings and welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we're in Jeremiah chapter 50 and 51. And I thought it was kind of funny for those of you who look at these someday, that some days the reads, and you've got going back and forth between all these books. And then you look at today and we're like, oh, we've only got 2 chapters in Jeremiah and we stay in the same book. But I think this was one of the longest reads we've had in weeks. But a good read. And the takeaways that I really enjoyed from this read today were actually there's 4 verses, but the first 2 verses speak about Judah, and the last 2 verses that I'm going to talk about speak about Babylon. And really, all 4 verses, well, you'll see what I'm talking about. In chapter 50, verse 5, it says, "They will ask for the way to Zion." Now, again, I said the first 2 verses are speaking of Judah. And this is a prophecy of when they leave exile. They leave Babylon. They're freed. And they will have to ask for the way to Zion. And there's a couple of ways you can take this. It'll be a brand new generation who didn't grow up in Jerusalem. And that's where Zion is located. So they will have to ask for directions on how to get there. It'll be like being exiled again and going to a whole new country, leaving the country that they've only known growing up in Babylon. But if you look at it deeper, the Jews and the Hebrews, they did not accept Christ. And when I was reading this, that was my thought, was that they will have to ask the way to Zion. And Zion is always this symbol of the Jewish people. And it's, can you hear my dog prancing around? I may have to start this over. He distracted me. Zion is just the symbolic mountain where just so many events took place. But it's where the Lord will return. And they knew the prophecy that God would come on the mountain of Zion. So they don't know the way to Zion. That's because even in New Testament times, the Jews did not recognize Jesus as the Christ. And in the New Testament, it tells us there's only one way to get to heaven. There's only one way to the Father, and that is through the Son. And they don't know the way to the Father because they don't know the Son. To me, this is very prophetic of future times when they recognize their need. And in Revelation, it says there will be 144,000 that God will hold back, and these will be His chosen people. 1,200, I think, is what it is. 1,200 people, 12,000 people from each of the 12 tribes. The number 12 very significant, but 12 times 12 equaling 144. But at that point, they will need to know Christ. They will need to know the way to Zion, and they'll have to go through Jesus. I just love the thought of that. And then chapter 50, verse 6, it goes on to explain a little bit how this prophecy, not only could this be prophetic, it's obviously a prophecy that is going to occur at least 70 years from when it was written. But, we could look at it as futuristic when Christ comes back. But it talks about the people are like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus spoke those very words when He came back. So I think it's got a dual meaning. I think it's talking about Christ coming back, but here we also read a lot about false prophets. And we read about false prophets yesterday, and they're leading the people astray. So it's happening while Jeremiah is writing it. It will happen again in the future. But I think it's a dual prophecy, and I did not want us to miss this in our read today. Then we drop down to 50 verse 29, and it starts talking about Babylon and the prophecy against Babylon, because like Assyria, if you remember, I don't know if it was a month or 2 months ago, but when we started talking about the Assyrians, God used the Assyrians as His tool to bring about the things that God wanted to take place in the world. The Jews couldn't believe that God would use the Assyrians, as terrible people. And just like the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar, God says, I can use who I want to use. I'm the creator, it's my world. But just like the Assyrians, The Syrians went too far, and they were too vicious and too mean and too cruel, and they didn't pull back. They kicked people when they were down. Babylon gets to the same point where they're cruel and heartless, and that really angers God. Plus, they've done something to the temple to desecrate it that really ticks God off. But we're going to read a couple of verses. The last part of 29, I'm not reading all of 29, but just the last part of it says, "For she became arrogant against the Lord." It's talking about Babylon. And we've seen this recurring theme of pride and a lack of humility, and we've seen how important that characteristic is. Um, Verses 30 and 31 says, "Therefore her young men will fall in her streets, and all her men of war will be silenced in that day, declares the Lord. Behold, I am against you, O arrogant one, declares the Lord of hosts. For your day is come, the time when I will punish you." And again, this is a prophecy 70 years from now, when the Israelites and I say the Israelites, that's kind of a collective for the northern tribe of Israel and the southern tribe of Judah, all being called the Israelites. But when they're released from Babylon and go back to their home, 70 years from now, this is what's going to happen. Babylon's going to be destroyed. Um, but I think it's just that's a human characteristic and trait that we've got to be careful of, is pride and arrogance. And, it's a good thing that we talk about this over and over and over again, because it's not me telling you that, oh, we've got to be careful of our pride and we've got to be humble. It's me talking about the Bible verses that we read every day. And if every other day we're talking about humility and pride, and it's that big of a theme in the Bible, then it's something we need to take serious and really pay attention to. Good read today. Tomorrow, we're going to go backwards, Jeremiah 49, and we're only going to read verses 34 through 39. Chapter 49, verses 34 through 39. Then we're going to go back a little bit further and read chapter 34, verses 1 through 22. Then we're going to jump over into Ezekiel and read chapters 1, 2, and 3 in Ezekiel. Be good reads. Look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow. Until then, you guys be safe.